Have you ever caught yourself putting something off because you're waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect idea or even the perfect version of yourself to emerge? Maybe you don't consider yourself a perfectionist because your closet isn't color-coded or something, or your life doesn't look Instagram perfect. But what if perfectionism shows up in the way that you hold yourself back? I used to be kind of proud of my perfectionism, but here's something funny. I'm pretty sure that my ADHD was actually protecting me from the worst of its effects. See, my perfectionist brain wanted everything to be flawless, but my ADHD brain wouldn't let me start anything till the very last minute. So instead of spending weeks agonizing over making everything perfect, I'd have to squeeze all that perfectionist energy into a 4-hour sprint the night before it was due. There wasn't really time to overthink or polish. I just had to get it done. It wasn't until I started working for myself that I realized just how deep my perfectionism ran. So without hard deadlines or grades at stake, I could push things back indefinitely until they felt perfect. So projects that should have taken days ended up stretching into weeks or months, and ideas got trapped in my mind because I couldn't figure out the perfect way to execute them. So suddenly, without all of the constraints of external deadlines, my perfectionism had free rein to run my life. But what's fascinating is that perfectionism isn't actually about being perfect. It's about never feeling good enough. And in our current culture of hustle harder and live your best life, this feeling of inadequacy has found the perfect breeding ground. So we're even trying to perfect the way we practice self-care or show up authentically. Can you see the irony? Well, today our guest is Ellen Hendriksen. She's a clinical psychologist and author of How to Be Enough: Self-Acceptance for Self-Critics and Perfectionists. She was also on the show way back in episode 23, talking about social anxiety. Well, she brings a fresh perspective to the perfectionism conversation by showing us how our values can secretly change into rigid rules and how true growth comes not from perfect execution, but from authentic alignment with what matters most to us. So in this episode, you'll learn the surprising difference between healthy high standards and destructive perfectionism, how to recognize when your good intentions have become rigid rules that don't really serve you, and why true connection comes from sharing our messy parts, not our perfect performance. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You guys, workplace stress is killing us. 61% of people are dealing with stress levels that are way beyond normal. So if you're feeling it, you are not alone. I used to think I could just push through everything, work harder, sleep less, pretend I had it all figured out, but that approach nearly broke me. I am all about following your joy. If that voice in your head is telling you to make a change, listen to it. Maybe you are ready to quit your job. Maybe you do need to flip your whole life upside down. But either way, you need support and tools to navigate it well. And that's where therapy comes in. Modern therapy teaches you how to set boundaries without feeling guilty, how to manage anxiety before it spirals, how to make big moves from a place of strength instead of desperation. And BetterHelp has over 30,000 therapists and has helped 5 million people worldwide. And you can talk to someone from your couch. No waiting rooms, no awkward scheduling. Therapy gives you the clarity on whether that voice telling you to make a change is your intuition or just the Sunday scaries. But either way, you deserve support. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/mindlove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove. Let me ask you something. How much time did you spend last week thinking about what to eat? Planning meals, making grocery lists, wandering around the store like a lost tourist. I used to waste entire Sunday afternoons on this, and it was exhausting. Then I found Hungry Root. Hungry Root fills your cart with personalized picks and plans your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. They have over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, and most are ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm actually headed to Michigan this week, and I had my Hungry Root order delivered there. So I already know that I have meals ready and plenty of snacks for the kids without scrambling to find a grocery store. It's just handled. And what I love most is their smart cart technology. It learns what I actually like and then recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements just for me. So no more buying spinach that rots in my fridge. They screen out over 200 additives and only source high quality ingredients. The time I've gotten back has just been life-changing. So take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE.
So perfectionism really tells us a fundamental lie. So it tells us that we can earn connection and belonging by being good at things through performance. But what really buys us connection and belonging is being a little vulnerable, showing some of the mess. So think about why your friends are your friends. Are you friends with them because they're good at things? Probably not. Probably you're friends with your friends because of how they make you feel. Perfectionism tells us this lie that we have to earn our way into being liked, when instead what we need to do is share more of ourselves.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
What inspired you to delve into all the nuances of perfectionism?
Sure. So there is an internal reason and an external reason. So essentially, I wrote the internal reason is that I wrote this book for me. There is a saying for self-help authors, which is write the book you need. And if my first book on social anxiety, called How to Be Yourself, was the book I needed 20, 25 years ago as a college student or nervous young adult, this is the book I need now. So that was partially for me, but I also wrote it because there is, I think, really a silent epidemic of perfectionism all around us. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and the majority of people who come to see me at the anxiety specialty center I work at, have perfectionism at the center of the overlapping Venn diagram of their struggles, but nobody ever comes in and says, Ellen, I'm a perfectionist. I need everything to be perfect. That never happens. What occurs is that folks come in and they say things like, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm falling behind. I should be further along in my life by now. I have a ton of things on my plate and I'm not doing any of them well. That's what I hear. And I think that's because the word itself, perfectionism, is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's really not about striving to be perfect. It's about never feeling good enough. So I wanted to dive into this topic, both for me, but also just for all the folks who come to see me and clinical psychologists like me.
I love that distinction, because so often people are like, but what do you mean? Yeah, I want things to be really, really great. I have really high standards for myself. I held a retreat earlier this year, just about last month, and we were talking about the shadow side and the strength side of pretty much anything. I believe that every single one of our shadows has a strength and every strength has a shadow. And so when you can really see that, sometimes it allows you to see things with a little bit more grace, and other times it allows you to see where you may experience more hiccups. And perfectionism came up a lot because it was a group of women. But the high standards was really resonating, but people can't help but feel the crippling nature of perfectionism. And I know you emphasize the dual nature. How can listeners identify which side they're leaning toward in their own lives?
Oh, for sure. I'm really glad you asked that. Yeah, no. So I do want to say that perfection. Okay, there are some researchers who would disagree with me, but there are also others who would definitely agree with me that perfectionism can be good. That those high standards you're talking about, or being attuned to detail, working hard, having a strong work ethic, caring deeply about our work, about the people in our lives. That's wonderful. Please keep doing that. That makes the world go round. Where it tips over into unhealthy perfectionism or clinical perfectionism is when there are two pillars of things that we're doing. One of which is self-criticism, and that's something that needs no introduction. We all do that from time to time. But in clinical perfectionism, self-criticism is particularly harsh and personalistic. So it could be, it varies a lot. It could be like insults, like, oh, I am such an idiot, or oh my God, why am I so stupid? It could be rhetorical questions like, why can't I do this? What is wrong with me? Or it could not even be thoughts at all, but just sort of be this low rumble of dissatisfaction with our lives and ourselves. So self-criticism is one of those pillars. And the other one might be new to some people. It's something called over-evaluation. And that is when we start to conflate our performance with our character. So forgive my grammar, but it's when I did good means I am good. And we can over-evaluate almost anything. So like classic examples might be, excuse me, classic examples might be like a striver student who really over-evaluates their grades. Like if they, get all A's, like they themselves are okay, but as soon as a B happens, oh no, like that means something bad, not just about like a grade or, something. Sometimes bad grades happen, not that a B is bad, but it means something about them. We can also over-evaluate, say, if we're somebody who struggles with our weight or body image, might over-evaluate our reflection in the mirror or the number on the scale. Could be the number on our paycheck, could be our job title. It could be whether or not what we've done today we consider to be being a good parent, a good mom. So there's so much that where we can really conflate our performance with our goodness as a person. So self-criticism and over-evaluation is what we need to watch out for.
I think one of the most life-changing concepts I've had to grasp or things I've had to unravel really is identification with the wrong things. Honestly, the deeper I get spiritually, the less I'm willing to identify with anything, really, except for as a spiritual entity in a human body. I don't know. But I find it easier to move through the world because even in the beginning of my self-growth, it's like all these different things to identify with, whether it's those personality type things, enneagrams, horoscopes, human design, which so many of those I find so helpful. And I might even attach to some of them for longer periods while I'm working through them. But I know that that's not who I am. My qualities and my traits are not who I am. My ADHD is not who I am. My struggles are not who I am. And one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ram Dass, he guides people to just consistently ask this question, like, who am I? Without trying to come up with your own answer, doing it over and over again in your life. And he says that that'll eventually shed things. But I find that oftentimes when I am feeling a negative emotion around something, it's really hard to do that unraveling. When I'm in a good high place, I'm like, oh yeah, spiritual entity in a human body. When I'm in a low place, I'm like, I don't know, what does this mean about me? It's just really hard not to create meaning based on the state of mind that you're in.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you've really stumbled across something that we actually try to do in the clinic with self-criticism. So I do a number of different kinds of therapy. I do good old cognitive behavioral therapy, but also acceptance and commitment therapy. The difference being, so CBT is trying to change our thoughts in order to feel a different way. And in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, it's more changing our relationship to our thoughts. They're still going to be there. They're still going to float through our mind, but we don't have to attach to them or identify with them as much as maybe we're used to. So Steve Hayes, who is the founder of ACT, has a wonderful metaphor that I like to use where he says, imagine a chessboard extending infinitely in all directions. And you've got the white pieces and the black chess pieces. And one of the sides represents your thoughts. So in this case, we'll do your one self-criticism. And the other side represents your reaction. And so we can have this game going on of self-criticism, either believing it or refuting it. But there's this chess game going on of our own self-talk and our reaction to that. Now, if we identify, you were saying, a spiritual entity in a human body, if we identify as the pieces, we're going to get all wrapped up in that back and forth conversation. But if we can think of ourselves as the chessboard itself, it's just where all this self-talk and reactions plays out. It's just the venue for the self-criticism or the reactions. And I really like that distinction, that we can try to see ourselves as the vessel or the venue in which all this plays out, but not have to get really tangled up and yanked around by it.
I love that. It reminds me of something I was just thinking about. I was doing the thing. I looked at a picture of myself and it happened to be an angle I didn't like or something like that. I'm like always amazed. Take a photo of me when I'm not expecting it, and it's like I'm making the worst face I've ever made in my life. And so I'm always amazed at like paparazzi shots of people. Or I don't even like paparazzi or celebrities, but especially people that come from upper class families, it's like they're taught how to sit and whatever. And they're taught all these things. And so you take a candid photo of many people there and they're like this beautiful stoic looking face. I was thinking about that because I came across something and I noticed, well, what am I doing here? I'm zooming into one of my features. And we never do that with other people, or we rarely do that with other people. We see them as the totality of who they are. And so I noticed I was looking at a friend who I believe is beautiful, but I was looking at them and I was like, yeah, why? Like having one of those comparison moments. And then I was like, hold on, I'm just zooming into my chin here. Zoom into her chin. Classically beautiful person. Yeah, I could find something weird if I was doing that. We don't do that. That's not how you look at a person. So why are we looking at ourselves that way? And I think so often we do that even with our own actions, which leads to the perfectionism. We're honing into this one little thing and not looking at the holistic creation itself, whether that's something physical that we're creating or even just how we're moving through our lives.
So it's funny you mentioned a picture. I actually had that experience today. I was finishing the audiobook for the book, and I asked the studio engineer to take a picture of me just to remember like recording this. And then when I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, is that what it's like? So anyway, I empathize with you. But so you also mentioned zooming in on flaws and details, and that's exactly what we do. So the tendency to over-evaluate and self-criticize, comes bundled with several other tendencies, and that includes, evaluating our performance or ourselves, our appearance. It could be anything, by focusing on flaws and details. So we zero in on the equivalent of the one frowning face in the crowd of smiles. Like we see the crumbs on the counter, we focus on that, like in the otherwise clean kitchen. So that's one thing, the flaws and details. And then you didn't say this specifically with looking at your picture, but we also evaluate things as all or nothing. So we set the bar for adequate at flawless. And then if we find anything wrong, or there's a mistake or we screw up or we struggle, we flip from all to nothing. So it renders many things not good enough. So like, for instance, like one cookie might ruin our healthy eating for the day. Losing our temper once with our kids makes us a bad mom. So yes, it comes bundled with other things. And I like what you said about that we tend to zoom in, and let's really zoom out. There's another metaphor I like to use where I say your attention is a spotlight, and you get to choose where to point it. And so if we notice ourselves zeroing in on, yeah, like our chin that we find objectionable, or on the equivalent of like the one crooked picture on the wall, or the one typo in the slide deck, or the one room for improvement line in our quarterly job evaluation, what we can do is, rather than spotlighting that one thing, is to metaphorically bring up all the house lights, and to not just move that spotlight to spotlight something positive, but to really see everything, positive, negative, neutral, and so that could be internal or external. So we're, say, perseverating on a line in our job evaluation. We can bring up all the house lights metaphorically and notice, like, just what's happening in our body. What are the sounds going on around us? There's a dog sleeping next to me. There, my kids are coming home. We can broaden the moment, and it doesn't make that one objectionable detail go away, but it creates a lot of buffer around it.
This reminds me of an interview I did like 6 years ago with an NLP practitioner, but it's something that I've carried with me because it actually worked. But she talked about how when you find yourself laser focused, like in an argument, if you tend to become very narrow-minded, like you can feel yourself just like zooming in on that one thing, like what you're going to say back, or what that person is saying, or how they're being egregious. And she said, just reach your arms out to the side and wiggle your fingers so where you can see them in your periphery, and it expands your vision and it just lightens things up. And it actually really works for me. So I do that whenever I'm like, and I can feel that like tension in my body. I'm like, hold on, zoom out, and I'll just like soften my gaze a little bit. And usually it'll soften my response, or at least be the first step to do so. But I think that same thing can be true for so many of these things, because we're hyper focusing on what we think is wrong in perfectionism, on how we're not good enough often, even if we're not seeing it that way. But I found it really fascinating when you contrasted the different types of perfectionism, because some people are like, yeah, textbook perfectionist. And other people are like, it took me 30 years to realize I was a perfectionist. And once I saw it, I could start to unravel a little bit. And so you used Disney and Mr. Rogers as the examples, but can you break down these different ways that we might see perfectionism manifest in our lives?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing about Walt Disney and Mr. Rogers. I mean, they're both titans of childhood. Like their creations are both like beloved, and interestingly, they had remarkably similar personalities. They had high standards. They were pretty intense. Hard work ethic, focused on the details, but they really lived these traits and like lived their values really differently. So, okay, like let's take, for example, like rigidity and fear of mistakes. So like I tell the story of Mr. Rogers. There was one taping of his show where, as he was changing from his blazer to his cardigan, that signature at the beginning of the show, he realized that the buttons were one hole off. And instead of calling, cut and like refilming, which the whole crew expected him to do because they knew his standards, on camera, he just rebuttons the sweater and remarks to audiences, like mistakes happen and they can be corrected. And by contrast, I tell a story of Walt Disney's like micromanagement of the making of Snow White. Like he just could not bring himself to trust the world-class team of artists he hired. He drives them into the ground. He knows all the details sort of pointlessly, like down to the number of light bulbs in the utility closet. And at the premiere, after all this heartbreak and sweat, he tells a reporter, I wish I could yank it back and do it all over again. So, there's definitely differences around mistakes, around detail orientation. But most importantly, I think, is there a difference between social connection. So Walt Disney really disengaged from those around him. He would, for instance, get really lonely and sort of, muse out loud, oh, I wish I had someone to talk to. And then when someone would lend him a listening ear, he would just sort of ruminate aloud about his childhood hardships and then never ask about the other person, or if they tried to interject something about themselves, sort of a Me Too connection moment, he would leave them hanging and say, got to get going. Whereas Mr. Rogers really engaged fully, with authenticity. He ran towards connection with so many different people in his life. And so how the two of them chose to approach others and connection, I thought was really important, because in perfectionism, it can be quite isolating, or we can harness our tendency to care deeply about people and use that to try to connect.
You mentioned in your book that perfectionism can masquerade as connection. How does this happen?
Sure. Yeah. So perfectionism really tells us a fundamental lie. So it tells us that we can earn connection and belonging by being good at things through performance. But what really buys us connection and belonging is just that, trying to connect with others, being a little vulnerable, showing some of the mess. So like, think about why your friends are your friends. Are you friends with them because they're good at things, like because they're good skiers, or because they're articulate, or because they have like great taste in restaurants? Like, probably not. Probably you're friends with your friends because of how they make you feel, supported and known, and maybe they're funny, maybe you have fun with them. So it's again, perfectionism tells us this lie that we have to earn our way into being liked, when instead what we need to do is share more of ourselves.
I actually think, or the feedback I've gotten, I should say, for why this podcast has been successful is because I just throw my mess out there. I'm not trying to be your guru. I'm going to let you know all the mistakes I took, which ones I'm still in, and where I am now. And I find it, like you said, if it's not the human side, it's just unrelatable. And I'll be honest, there was a time where sometimes the status of people did draw me to them. I was in my 20s, and all of those connections felt empty. And much of it my fault, because that's what I was going toward. And then I'm like, wait, why don't we feel like real friends? Stop choosing your friends based on what you think they could get you. And usually it was just like in a club or something. but we all kind of, many of us go through that. And now it's just like, no, I could care less the mistakes that you've made or the mistakes that you are currently making. But can you show up in this moment and be present? Can we talk about things? Can I also be myself? Because that's the part that's critical, is we often meet people where they are. And so if somebody is putting on armor in whatever way that they do that, I can feel my walls go up. If somebody is just being who they are, I suddenly have permission to just come as I am too. And that's when the real connection occurs.
Absolutely. So I think, okay, so you mentioned that this podcast has become successful in part, I think, because, and you didn't use this word, but I'll say because you're vulnerable. Because, okay, so vulnerability, I think, has become one of those buzzwords that sort of can mean everything and nothing. And so let's define it just so we're on the same page. So I think vulnerability is a willingness to reveal, thoughts or actions or emotions that could result in criticism or rejection, but it's taking a leap of faith that they won't. Like if we think of the word literally, vulnerable is being at risk. We put ourselves at risk for criticism, rejection, judgment when we disclose something vulnerable. But when we do that, it sends two messages. When we are vulnerable, it sends two messages. One is, I trust you. Like, I trust you to see some of my mess. I trust you to like kind of look under the rug and like shine a flashlight under there. And secondly, it says we are the same. It's not like handing down advice from on high. It doesn't broadcast like sort of like a mentor-mentee relationship or like student-teacher relationship. It says we're equal, we're the same. And I think both those things are really, really important for building connection and building friendships, building relationships. And I don't know. I think vulnerability is particularly interesting because it's not about the topic. Like, some folks will talk about their adultery or like their drug addiction, like in the first conversations. And if it's said to sort of off the cuff and matter of fact, it's not actually particularly vulnerable. Whereas some people are really ashamed to tell you that they only hit their workout goals 6 days this week, right? Like it's not about the topic. It's about what we find a little bit hard to share, what we have like a little bit of nervousness around. And so I think it just makes it very individual what is vulnerable and what will draw people to us. I like what you said about the armor, because I think perfectionism tells us to do the opposite of vulnerability, and that's something called perfectionistic self-presentation. So that is when we show what's going well and we hide what's going poorly. We're trying to protect ourselves, like just like you said with the armor, from judgment or criticism. But what happens is that by performing what we think is appropriate and only showing the good stuff, it backfires, because being unrelatable and invulnerable keeps us separated from that very community and acceptance that we want. And then, here's the callback to that lie of perfectionism. Then we think we have to earn it back through exemplary performance.
It sounds like the hardest part of perfectionism is that people are tying their self-worth to their accomplishments. And so it seems like it can be this, it could be a good thing where, yes, I have high standards and yes, I'm attention to detail. And I think a lot of people don't want to look at their issues. And so they tend to kind of gleam towards the good side, or they just beat themselves up and let it be. But it's like, if you don't do that work to come back to where your worth really comes from, it's actually going to be kind of hard to know yourself.
For sure. Yeah. And, to be, there's an epigraph in the book, a quote from Carl Jung of I'm going to paraphrase this because I can't remember it exactly, but it's essentially, to be whole, we need to have a shadow side. And so I think not only, showing some of the mess, but like letting ourselves, allowing some mess in our lives is really important. Allowing some mistakes, allowing ourselves to screw up. And I think what often will happen is that, again, in perfectionism, when we set this bar for adequate at flawless, whenever we do screw up or make a mistake, it shunts us from like being a good person to being not enough. So what I try to do in the clinic, or like when we're trying to make room for mistakes, is to try to retain people's like good evaluation of themselves as a person while creating room for mistakes. So like, for instance, let me tell you a story about a client that we'll call Jamie. And so she's a mom, and she's very concerned with being a good parent, because in her own family of origin, so she came from an unstable family with like some emotional, physical violence, and she's working really hard to break the cycle for her kids. She's working really diligently, but she still yells at them on occasion. And we all default to our factory settings when we're under stress. So it's understandable. And it would really throw her for a loop when she would lose her temper. She never hit them, but when she would yell at them, she would just spiral and think, oh, like this is never going to work. I'm a terrible mom. Like I'm working so hard and it's come to nothing, really, really all or nothing evaluation. And so what we tried to do was to not approve of yelling at the kids, but to look at her expectations. How often could she reasonably expect herself to screw up? And the answer can't be zero. We're human, we're going to screw up. You could also phrase it as, what standard would you hold someone else to who's in your same position? And so she decided that 90% of the time When she was tempted to yell, she would expect herself to stop, which I thought was quite a high bar even there. But it still gave her 10% wiggle room, which is way different than zero. Now, she didn't approve of the 10%, like it didn't make it okay, but it made it understandable. And the kicker she found was that making room for mistakes actually diminishes the chances that they'll actually happen.
I have a spirited child, and understanding what a spirited child is has definitely helped my sanity. But he's so amazing. There's all these really great parts about it, and I can see myself like I probably was that child, and he's kind of a genius, which makes it even harder. And so I'm so aware that I don't want to condition any of this out of him. But then I also have to be aware that for the next few years, that means I'm making things harder on myself because I'm not just shutting it down. Anyways, the point being, I had a point, especially when he first was in that like 3-year-old zone, where I'm not used to the I don't know. I feel like I haven't had those cringe attacks as you talk about, which I want to talk about those because they're so interesting. But I haven't had like the flood of like really beating myself up in a while until that. And then because of all the work that I've done, something about that almost made it harder for me because I couldn't think. It wasn't like I was just going along through life and now of course I'm yelling. This is difficult. It was like I've done so much work. I should be farther along than now. And it was a great experience and still is because I love the things that kind of humble me. And there's been a lot of those in my life where I'm like, you know what? I was too cocky in this area, or you know what? I thought I had this, and thank you for showing me because now I can relate to way more people. But anyways, I understood that for him, or for anybody really, yeah, it could be great if I was just a perfect mother the whole time and I never yelled at him. And wow, maybe his nervous system would be so balanced if that never happened. And also, then what? When he's a imperfect human and then he has issues and then he's like, well, my mom never yelled at me. What is wrong with me? And it's like, I should be better than this because of this. Instead of just being willing to have my moment, my emotions are gone. Okay, I can calm myself now. Mommy lost her cool. I'm really sorry about this. But I find I think that's becoming more common, especially if you follow parenting accounts on Instagram. But that's the case with any relationship. Especially, I mean, I see it a lot in my relationship with my husband, where we still have our moments, but when one of us comes to the other and is just like, I messed up, then the other one immediately is like, no, so did I. And then it becomes easier and easier. I don't even think we have those like stubborn periods longer than the emotion lasts anymore because we know that each of us is always willing to back down. But again, it reminds me of what we talked about earlier about giving somebody permission, showing your humanness. So even if you make the mistake, but then come back to it in a good way, own up to it, do something different, that is even more helpful, even more humanizing than if you were to show up perfect all of the time anyways.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. And okay. So I think this is a really nice segue to self-compassion, which is another one of those concepts that has sort of taken on a life of its own. And so I think this is really important for people with perfectionism because, okay, as somebody with perfectionism and also as a therapist, so I was taught that self-compassion was talking to myself like a good friend. But my perfectionistic brain thought that meant that I needed to generate this like steady stream of articulate and like effective hype. And that's way too high a bar. And so I like you were giving the example of, just like talking with your husband and saying, oh, I messed up. Oh, no, I messed up. It doesn't have to be this like self-compassion speech writing. It can be like little phrases. So in learning about perfectionism and self-compassion, have learned that I can distill, if I'm going to use words, it can be much smaller than this like, self-compassion speech writing. It can just be like easy, or it's okay, or Like it could just be a gesture. Like it could be self-compassion could be just putting your hand on your heart, like putting your hand on your shoulder. And this was helpful to me. We can't really control our thoughts. We can't really control our feelings. Like with our thoughts, like don't think about a cheeseburger floating above my head. Like we can't really control our thoughts. Okay, the thing that we can control is our actions. And just like you talked about with your husband, that could be apologizing, that could be having a discussion afterwards. And for ourselves, if it's just us, a way to be self-compassionate, it can be through our behaviors. So that might be something as simple as giving ourselves time to drink our coffee in the morning, giving ourselves a few minutes under the warm spray of the shower on a cold morning, like going to yoga because we know that we'll feel better afterwards. Like we know from experience that if we go, we'll feel better. Or importantly, I think this is important for people with perfectionism, it can be permission not to go to yoga because we're exhausted or we're overwhelmed. So not only can self-compassion be an action, be a behavior, it could be something that's, hashtag self-care, or it could be permission not to do everything we expect of ourselves. And I think for me, at least, that was pretty mind-blowing.
I find what's helped me the most with self-compassion has been understanding the way my brain works. Because we talked earlier about identification. And so you start in the self-development journey. You're like, okay, I'm going to be more compassionate with myself. Something happens. You're beating yourself up. You're like, God, I just want to find compassion. You can't even get there. You're like, so then you're beating yourself up over the fact that you're beating yourself up. And it ends up becoming this whole spiral. And so understanding all of the inner workings of my brain, like, first of all, okay, if I haven't been doing this a long time, I have a lot of habits of thoughts that have not been changed yet. But also, my brain is trying to keep me safe. These thoughts are not me. It's just the neural pathways doing what they do to keep me in a familiar zone or to keep me from stepping out of my comfort zone or from all of these little things. And then the realization, okay, well, if I want to grow, if I want to do big things in this world, I need to get comfortable with this outside zone. How do I work with this? And so it really helps with that disidentification of it all. And that reminds me of what I brought up briefly earlier about the cringe attacks. Because I think, like I said before too, when I'm in a certain brain state, suddenly it's harder to reach for all of my tools because it's already spiraling down a loop. Tell us about cringe attacks, because I think we all experience them. And if we're expecting them, we might relate to them a little bit differently.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so cringe attacks. So it's a colloquial name, but it's a real, scientific concept, is when we are sort of slapped by a memory of something embarrassing or humiliating that we've done in the past. It could even be decades ago. And a cringe attack is a physical experience. It's sort of like a wince or like a kind of a shake like a wet dog. Like you can feel the embarrassment in your body as your brain sucker punches you, with this embarrassing memory, maybe even from decades ago. And they're all of us have them. We all cringe when we think about the dumb thing we said, I don't know, to our crush in sixth grade or whatnot. But people with perfectionism tend to have a lot more of them, because if we expect ourselves never to do anything foolish, to not do things that are embarrassing, to not make stupid mistakes, then those inevitable experiences, because we're human, are going to feel much more like transgressions and will hit us that much harder or that much more often. So it's only a problem if you think it shouldn't be happening. So if we can let go of the expectation that we never do anything wrong, we never do anything embarrassing, we never make fools of ourselves, then they become a lot, either they diminish or they become a lot easier to take. Just like you can grieve the loss of a person or a pet, you can grieve and you can grieve an expectation, a conviction, or a belief, and let go of beliefs like, I should be able to handle every situation with grace. I should overcome any obstacle, no matter how great. Like there may be convictions that most of the time are very helpful to us, but when we inevitably, can't fulfill them or struggle, then letting them go, grieving them can be super helpful.
This reminds me of a concept you talk about of people's inner rule books. And we all have them. It's like these invisible rules that we're living by. Maybe we picked them up from somewhere. Maybe we inherited them. Maybe we created them through our own life experience, through our own expectations. But until people identify what hidden rules they're running in their subconscious, it can be really hard to disentangle. How can listeners identify and then rewrite the rigid rules that are not serving them anymore?
Yeah, for sure. No, and then especially in perfectionism, like not only do we orient to rules, like we want to know the rules so we can follow them, but if there are no rules, we make up our own rules. We set personally demanding rules and then we follow those. Like think about maybe, maybe our listeners have, made up rules for how to eat healthy or steps for tackling a project. Or the classic that I always come across is like the right way to load the dishwasher. So none of those rules are bad, absolutely. Like they give us structure. If anxiety is driven by uncertainty, rules reduce uncertainty and therefore rules reduce anxiety. Rules can be good. It's when they become rigid or someone's generic idea of the right thing as opposed to what we actually want and value that they can get in our way. So okay, here, I'll tell you a story. I had a client who, I quote her here, she said, through a combination of God and my mother, I was taught to be generous. But for her, this was manifesting as a rule. So she said, for example, if somebody on the street asked her for $1, or if someone asked her to babysit, she had to do it. Like the way be generous was taught to her was that she had to do it. And so that was manifesting as a rule. And what we can do is try to shift to values. So yet another concept that has become so widespread that it can mean a lot of things, but let's define it so we're on the same page. So rather than following rules, we can shift to values, which can be anything. They can be concepts like equality or hard work. They can be things like books. They can be activities like running or the outdoors. They could be relationships like connecting with your kids or being a loving partner. So this is the work of Dr. Michael Tuhig and Dr. Clarissa Ong, and they worked together at Utah State University, and they defined 4 qualities of a value. One is that values are continuous. So you're never done living a value. So just like somebody who plays piano is never done learning piano, a person of faith is never done practicing their religion. We're never done living our values. 2, values are intrinsically meaningful, meaning we'd care about it even if no one else ever knew. So like getting famous isn't a value. So it has to be something that's really driven from inside, comes from within us. 3, values are under our control, like they're not contingent upon anyone else. So like being loved isn't a value, or being respected, but we can be respectful, we can be loving. And then finally, I think this is the most important part, is that values are freely chosen. So values are never coercive or obligatory. So we freely choose to follow them. We might even be like willing to tolerate some discomfort, like some inconvenience to follow them. So when you ask like about rules, I think that's the crux. When things start to feel coercive or obligatory, we can see if like the generosity example, if rather than that as a value, it's functioning as a rule.
I completely understand. I live by my values. It was one of the most enlightening exercises I've ever done, is finding my values. Well, finding my values is one. It was actually really understanding what that meant to me. How do I work with these values? How do I apply them? How do I look at them through a lens? And one of the things you talk about in your book is how social media culture has kind of amplified this need for perfectionism. We're seeing everything to everyone else, how their house looks, how they're parenting, this inner dialogue of the conversation they had when their kid had a meltdown, like everything. And so the live your best life mentality, as you call it, for some reason, the last 3 episodes have reminded me of, it's a period of time I called my transformation addiction phase, because I was reading things and I was like, okay, well, I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do this. And it was so overwhelming that it did the exact opposite of what the goal should be. It took me away from who I really was instead of stripping back the layers. And so now when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling like I don't know what to do next, when I'm feeling like, is this the right move? I come back to my values because it's a good filter. It's like, yeah, this sounds like a great fun opportunity, but is it going to offer me more freedom? Is it going to offer me more expression and creation? The things that I always come back to, because and that took 10 years of being like overcommitting to things and then being like, why does this feel so off? Oh, this did the exact opposite of give me more freedom. All of a sudden, I'm living to somebody else's schedule. All of a sudden, there's all these expectations. And so really understanding your values to come back to, and I'll give a good example with perfectionism here. So the thing that I find myself comparing on social media is everybody's homes. I do not think that I have the talent nor the desire to be an interior decorator. Nor do I feel like hiring somebody when I have a 1 and a 3-year-old. I don't even want to get a new couch, even though I hate my couch right now. And so then I'll be like recording a video and it's like, oh, but the background doesn't look that great. Oh, but this doesn't look that great. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and so for like 5 years I had in my head, okay, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. And then I finally had to let it go and be like, you don't want to get to that. You don't value that. I would rather have a climbing wall on my wall for my kids and for me, a space to do handstands than have a nice vase. Like, I just don't care. And that realization was so freeing because it just let go of this weight that I was putting on myself for no reasons other than I was internalizing that I thought I should, because so many people have these beautiful beige houses on Instagram. Rant over.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. No, I clearly, like, you run towards the values of, of freedom, of like your interests. Absolutely. Keep doing that. Something that I've seen happen in the clinic is that people will say, well, now I have to do this because it's my value. And then it starts to function as a rule because it says what I have to do, what I can't do, who I have to be, who I can't be. Or people will say, well, if they're stuck between 2 values, they'll say, well, I have to choose the right value. And if I do, I'm going to feel amazing. And so I'll tell you a story about that. This is from a friend of mine, and she's given me permission to use this story. So this is my friend Victoria. And she had an afternoon, she had a weekend, a Saturday afternoon, like a few weeks ago, where she had to choose between attending her book club or going kite surfing, which are both very valued activities for her. And so she was telling me that she got caught up in, I have to choose the right value. Like, I value my friends, I value reading, I should go to book club. But, I value the outdoors, I value an active lifestyle, so I should go kite surfing. It became shoulds. And so, like what we talked about before, how values are freely chosen, both of those felt coercive to her. So they were functioning as rules, not values. And she was under the assumption that if she just chose the right thing, if she made the right decision, she would feel great. And so when she did choose the kite surfing and went out and thoroughly enjoyed one of the last days of the season, she second-guessed herself and said, wait a minute, why do I feel guilty about missing book club? She thought she had done it wrong. And she realized that there wasn't a right answer because, she was using the word should. So, she wasn't really following values. And she learned something that I think is really important, is that following our values doesn't always feel great. That we have to be willing to reach into the bag of mixed emotions to get access to the good ones. So, for instance, like I value, supporting my kids' interests, but that means that I go to a lot of squawky orchestra concerts. And if I did that as a rule, like I have to go to these, I would feel resentful or in need of some ibuprofen. And then furthermore, because it's my value and because I want to run towards supporting my kids' interests, I am willing to experience some discomfort or go, experience something that I, maybe wouldn't choose otherwise. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that simply choosing when we're stuck between values the right thing doesn't guarantee that we're going to feel amazing, but that's okay. Living a life we want to live, being the person we want to be, is going to come bundled with some, a little bit of negative emotion sometimes. And that you'll know that values are functioning as rules if they start to feel coercive or obligatory or dutiful, rather than running towards what you find important or purposeful or meaningful.
What comes up for me when you share that is the slippery slope of using these things we learn, whether about ourselves or that's a good way to be, as a deterrent from actually knowing ourselves. And so when we're creating our own rules, like I even said with my morning routine and my self-help addiction at a time, I was outsourcing all the things that I thought would make a great life. And so even now, I know a ton about myself. I can usually spot where the nuance of something is going to be in the beginning. Like, yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun, but it's going to be hard here. But if I don't continuously come back to myself and say, like, how does this feel? I thought this was going to be a really good decision. Is it, now that I've had some time with it? I thought this was going to feel good. Does it, now that I've had some time with it? That's how we create an intuitive life. And if we're outsourcing our intuition to these different rules, whether we're creating them or somebody else creates them for us, then we're going to skip this process of really understanding ourselves deeply. That's like if you went on a first date with somebody and they told you a bunch of things about themselves, and then that's all you looked at. And you didn't say, well, she told me that she likes this, but I'm actually noticing she gets irritated when I react like that. Nope, but she said it. I'm going to keep doing it. Like, that's not an intuitive relationship. There's so many things where my husband will be like, yeah, you say that, but this, and this. And I'm like, that feels so good that I can see, like, I have an outside view for my patterns sometimes. Like, that's why people will hire a therapist or a coach or whatever it is. And so, it doesn't skip out on the process of coming back to yourself and saying, does this still feel right? Even if there are things that feel right to me for 10 years, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is off. Maybe I've evolved out of it. And so that might not necessarily be the rule I've set for myself, but it reminds me, though, of how you talk about emotion management as well. Like, and in the context of your book, you're talking about procrastination as emotion management. But I think so much of what we do is trying to override these feelings of discomfort when usually that's where the growth is.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness. So, okay. So you talked about learning the way your brain works and your habits of thoughts. And so, okay, for me, as somebody with a dash of perfectionism, would tend to really criticize myself after, when I was younger, like after I took an exam, I think, oh my God, I probably failed. Or like today, after honestly something like this, like a podcast interview or anything involving a microphone, my brain will just kind of start going and be like, oh, like I forgot to say this. Why didn't I say that? Or I stumbled on this. Why, that was really dumb. And just my brain will just start going. It's just the way my brain works. But what I've learned in learning about perfectionism and also just learning about myself is that this is just what my brain does. This is just how I'm wired, but it doesn't mean that the content of those thoughts is true or that I have to listen to it. And so I've learned to not only kind of expect, okay, here it comes, like this is what happens after I do anything involving a microphone, but I've tried to take the stance of listening to it sort of like I listen to the music at a coffee shop or like the music over the speakers at the grocery store. Like it's there, like I can hear it, but I don't have to like sing along. I don't have to get really involved with it. It can just be there. I can let it be and then turn my attention towards what I want to be doing, towards what I value. So importantly, I'm not getting rid of it. Like all that brain chatter is still there, but I don't have to engage with it. And I think that for me has been really important in terms of learning how my brain works.
Well, we've covered so much, and I know this is already helpful for me, so probably all the other perfectionists in the world, but I love to leave listeners with one action item or thought to ground all of this in, to at least make them feel like they're making some sort of progress instead of being overwhelmed by everything we talked about. So what would you leave them with today?
Yeah, absolutely. So to wrap up our conversation about rules and values and, trying to be ourselves, I think I talk about in the book about 2 yardsticks. And so this is the work of Dr. Michael Tuhig. And he says that the perfectionistic yardstick is like, did I do it right? Did I follow the rules? And instead, he challenges us to shift over to a different yardstick, which is, am I being the person I want to be? Am I living the life I want to live? And that's really different than did I do it correctly? And so I would sum this all up to say, to run towards what is meaningful, purposeful, interesting, live the life you want to live, be the person you want to be, and choose those behaviors rather than trying to follow someone else's generic idea of the right thing.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've brought to this conversation and our last episode. For listeners that want to connect with you and find your book, where's the best place for them to connect?
Sure. So you can find the book anywhere, or the audiobook anywhere you like to get your books. It's called How to Be Enough: Self-Acceptance for Self-Critics and Perfectionists. I also have another book on social anxiety, and the place I post most online is Substack. It's called How to Be Good to Yourself When You're Hard on Yourself.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/382. Your challenge for this week is to step back and look at your whole self-growth journey. So instead of trying to perfect every area of your life at once, choose just one value that really matters to you right now. Notice where you might be turning that value into some sort of rigid rule, and then experiment with just loosening your grip a little bit. So maybe that means letting go of shoulds around your morning routine, or releasing the pressure to meditate for exactly 20 minutes every day. So the goal isn't to lower your standards, but it's to create space for genuine growth and self-discovery. And speaking of perfectionism in personal growth, I see so many of us trying to transform our entire lives overnight, and then feeling like failures when we can't keep up with all of those changes. This is exactly why I created Living Mind Love. So instead of overwhelming yourself with a massive self-improvement project, we take it just one small, manageable step at a time. Each month, you get a new focus area delivered right to you, designed to flow naturally with the rhythms of your life. And I'm talking things like figuring out a routine that works for you, figuring out the one keystone habit that actually makes everything else easier or unnecessary, so you're not trying to do meditation and yoga and breath work and cold plunges all in your morning routine. And then also understanding how to set goals in a way that you work with the natural laws of the universe instead of feeling like you're going uphill or can't find flow in your life. There is so much value in this program, but in a way that's meant to really fit in with your life so that it feels easy and manageable. Plus, you'll get access to the first Mind Love community on School, where you can connect with everyone else on this journey for authentic growth. So if you're ready to make changes that stick without that perfectionist pressure, sign up at mindlove.com/living. You can also find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And if you want to wake up with a little note of inspiration, head to mindlove.com and sign up for the Morning Mind Love, or you can text the word morning to 33777. Each weekday morning, you get a little oracle from your highest self. All the goodies. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.